attending this meeting, you are deemed to have consented to be filmed and the use of those images and sound recordings for this meeting. Can I please remind all members and members of the public that when speaking, not to disclose any personal information of an individual, as this may infringe their rights of that individual and breach the Data Protection Act. Members are also reminded not to disclose confidential information, including those of an individual or organisation that may result in a breach of confidentiality rules. In the spirit of democracy and inclusivity, I wish to encourage all members here present tonight to take part in the discussion during the debate. Naturally, I am sure all members will be mindful of constructive debate in our common interest. I ask you all to treat each other with respect, courtesy and dignity at all times, and this includes when listening to others to speak, as well when responding to points raised during the course of the debate. If I feel at any point that a member is not treating others respectfully, I may interrupt the debate to address. Members, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Avoid repeating points that have already been made by another member. And could I also request that you ensure your microphone, which should be in front of you, is turned on when you're speaking, and remember to turn it off when finished. If any items are passed to the vote this evening, voting will be conducted by a show of hands. And again, when that happens, if you could make sure your hand is clearly raised and kept there until asked to lower. Welcome once again and good evening. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I have been notified of Councillor Woodhead, Beverly Gaynor, Cliff Andrews. Anybody else? I'm conscious we're missing Councillor Fage. I don't know if anybody's heard from him at all. Fabulous. Okay, and I haven't heard. Anybody heard from Councillor Watkins? No. Okay. Noted. Thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest under the Localism Act 2011, and in accordance with the Council's Code of Conduct, members are required to declare any interests which are not currently entered in the member's register of interests, and if he or she may have not notified the monitoring officer thereof. If any member has a disclosable pecuniary interest item on the agenda, and the member may wish to not participate in that item unless a dispensation has first been requested or granted by the Council. Are there any such declarations, please?
I've recently become the local authority governor for Sutton Primary School, but it's not yet on the register of interests because it's a very recent addition. But because we've got the school organisational plan, I thought I'd mention that.
Thank you, Hayley. Any others for this evening? Thank you. Moving swiftly through to Chairman's announcements. I don't have anything too windy this evening, you'll be pleased to note. Worth raising current consultations in the open. Obviously the principles for the school organisation plan, which we are joined by Gareth this evening to present, and recently unveiled, I saw that in my own inbox recently today actually, the domestic abuse strategy. That consultation is due to close on Monday the 25th of November, so I would encourage all to take part and encourage everybody that you can to do so. We will move to item 4, public open session. Have we been notified of anybody wishing to speak? Sarah, anything from you on that one? No. Okay. Item number 5. Updates from CBC and Biggleswade Town Councillors. The floor is open.
So fairly busy. As you know, we're coming towards budget setting time, so it starts to get a little bit interesting. Stephen's smiling. Starts to get a little bit interesting. As you know, the council doesn't have a great deal of money, so it is going to be very much about where efficiencies can be made. So we're all looking forward to that. So lots of meetings and conversations around that. Locally, I did a day of action with the CBC community officers, but also with the police. We don't think we had fire there in the end, but we had someone from Grand Union, we had people from housing. wide variety of people. We covered the section of Drove Road, Eagle Farm Road, sort of that area of town. So we covered quite a large area between us all. Speaking to people, finding out what the issues are in the area. And interestingly, I made a point of dragging the policeman down the back of Eagle Farm Road, and the passageway that goes between Eagle Farm Road and King's Reach, which we know is an issue. There are a few issues there. One is around lighting. The lighting is poor, but the lighting column is quite low, so it means it limits what we can do. So I've been talking to officers about what we can do about that. But also it's that there's a bend. I don't know if you know that area well enough, but there's a bend, so you just can't see round. I know, Sarah, you've been out there, so you just can't see round it. So it's really poorly sighted, which means natural surveillance isn't great. So we worked with officers, including yourself, Sarah, I believe, who went out and have done some work on there and are keeping looking at it as well, aren't you, Sarah? So and I think that was a really good. Yeah. Do you want to update? Yeah.
Sorry, is that okay?
Yes, of course.
So yeah, it's footpath 27. We've been working with rights of way and sustainability colleagues actually, because it is about cutting back the vegetation, but not doing it in such a way that it causes other issues. But we've also connected with the community payback scheme, and also through social value, one of our contractors has offered a volunteer. So we've got some of that time and equipment and kit and skills, etc. And I think they've identified the 4th of November to actually go and do that cutting back. And I emphasise it's cutting back. And I think they're doing a letter drop to residents as well, so that nobody's taken by surprise.
So yeah, so I think you and I, so Councillor Tranter, myself, officers, we all kind of, once it was highlighted, I think it was a really good example actually of how CBC can work. And actually, Peter as well, I think you and I had some conversations about some other areas down there. So I think altogether it was just a great example of how it can work. So hopefully that will, as you said, that'll be action shortly. And actually there was an incident there not long afterwards. So it was just very fortuitous that we'd happened to have been down there the week before, and I'd flagged it as an issue. So overall, I think the day was a huge success. We've got our usual issues of, potholes, lighting issues, and obviously as the night starts to draw in, I would really urge anybody to report lighting issues in particular on Fix My Street. There is a tendency, I have found, that things get fixed seemingly, and then they break almost immediately with lighting, and so it doesn't look like they've been fixed. If that happens, flag it with me and I'll pick it up. It seems to happen remarkably frequently. I think it's just the nature of street lighting, is that if it's something that's going to keep going, we need to kind of find out. I think the lights up by the retail park are a prime example. They keep breaking, and we'll get to the bottom of it eventually. So yeah, just flagging that so that people are reminded to report streetlights in particular as the nights start to draw in, because we know we always get a real rush as the clocks change. So let's try and get ahead of ourselves a little bit on that one. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Hayley. Anybody else? Please.
Just to flag formally that the traffic lights in the high street still aren't working properly. When I came past tonight, one post had got a green light on it, the other hadn't. And that's been out of action at what old people like us, like me, call the Swan Corner. I think you know which ones I mean. And really, they've been out of action several days now.
Thank you. Is Councillor Howe online? He is. Could I open up the floor to Councillor Howe, just in case he has any updates he'd like to give as well, given he's here?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Oh yeah, just a couple of updates concerning the bridge on the Common. I'll put that into Fix My Street. There's been a bit of dialogue backwards and forwards. So it is a bespoke bridge. So the new treads are actually being made, and there's a structural survey on the bridge being carried out just to make sure it's got some longevity to it. And it will be repaired pretty quickly within the next couple of weeks, I hope.
Thank you. Anything else from you, councillor?
Yeah, just is there any update with regards to the football club, cricket club grant for some repairs to the buildings that are in a sorry state, unfortunately? Is there any progress on that at all?
I think that could be in the action log, Paul, so we'll pick that up under another item later.
Okay, and if anybody remembers, there was a presentation about businesses in the town, and I spoke about promoting a link between the colleges and local businesses. I'm still chasing that bone vehemently, just to try and link things up. I've actually spoke to Richard Fuller as well, without a great deal of progress, to be honest. But I was trying to get him to be the sort of champion of linking trainees up that have just finished their college and they need to get an apprenticeship. So that is one I'm pursuing very hard. So when I get an update on anything, I'll let you know.
Thanks, Paul. Yes.
Could I just say in answer to Councillor Howe that we did have a business forum a week ago, Monday, and we did have 2 senior officers from CVC, plus partners from Cranfield and the University of Bedfordshire, and 2 others who are working with the grants that are available. But also we did have some people there from, for instance, Ivor Valley School, so just looking at what the progress, what the routes might be for the children from Ivor Valley. So we're hoping that we might repeat that business forum maybe in 6 months' time, and we would hope to draw more people into that. And Richard Fuller did attend and speak to the assembled group. So we are trying to do something about that from the town council's point of view.
Thank you. And I've heard good feedback on that, and I very much applaud it. I think it's a great thing to do, and I will certainly try and make sure I can get there next time as well. So good. Hayley.
Sorry to come back in, and apologies I couldn't make it last week, but I wasn't very well. Just to say that I also met with what they call the developers of Land East a couple of weeks ago, and obviously with the new government and their new desire to promote garden villages, I think it's likely that we might see an acceleration of that development. So I think it would be worth this committee inviting them along to talk to us, to the town council, but also to us as a joint committee as well, because I think we'd like to see an acceleration of that.
Please.
I'd raise the issue on that I think there's a Grampian condition about A1 roundabouts, and I'd very much like to know what the proposal is for the Section 106 agreement and what they're likely to do for the A1 roundabouts, and confirmation that the rest of the Section 106 is still in place. I mean, I'm expecting that it is, but it would be nice to know that that is actually all going ahead. But some of us can't quite see what might happen with the A1 roundabouts, and some of us are old enough to remember when traffic lights were put on the Sandy roundabout and they had to be removed a little bit later because they just made things worse. So what might happen with those roundabouts is quite critical, actually.
Kareem.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. In response to Councillor Whitaker's point around the Land East developer, my understanding is that they have been invited to the next joint committee for January, and they've accepted, I think, as well.
Thanks, Kareem. I did extend that invite a while back, but I've not spoken to Esther or Salamanca Group at all since then. So it's good to know that they're coming along.
Esther Croft was at the business forum.
Yeah, she did tell. I caught up with her on Friday actually, and she did tell me there. So again, I'm glad that they were there. I think that's a really good sign, personally. Hayley.
Just coming back to Madeline, as far as I'm aware, the S106 agreement as stands is still in place and it has not yet been renegotiated. That's as far as I'm aware at the moment.
Any other updates from the floor? I will provide a brief update myself, if I may. Lighting has come up, but you'll all be well aware of my travails in trying to resolve lighting issues on Saxon Drive and vegetation on Saxon Drive and safe crossing points on Saxon Drive. Some make better progress than others. My thanks to Councillor Fage, who also helped with some of the cutting back there when we eventually managed to get the northern section of that done as well. The roundabout continues to be a point of discussion at Foxglove and Moonflower Place, because that really does need clearing to make that crossing area safe as far as I'm concerned. There is obviously a challenge around netting out the biodiversity, but I would rather have that conversation later and make people safe now. So I'm continuing to push on that. The lighting around there, as you will remember, this time last year, we had a success. It all came back on. Not long after, we got the traffic lights working and then all the lighting went out again. We've had multiple investigations done around there, and I believe there is something amiss with underground cabling that is causing a series of faults on those lights. It is still under investigation. But as the nights draw in, that area concerns me because there is a lot of foot traffic that moves between the retail park and the industrial area, particularly for jobs and night workers and similar, and it's not a pleasant place to be in the pitch dark. So I will keep leaning on that because it is really dark around there. There's not a lot of natural light from anything. And just aligned to that as well, a number of us were in attendance at the Youth Parliament launch. I don't know if any of you were aware of that, but the Youth Parliament launch happened at Priory House a couple of weeks ago, and there were children in attendance from Biggleswade schools pushing quite hard on a variety of different agendas, including things like mental health matters and open spaces and all sorts of stuff. It was great to see our young folks so really engaged and pushing so hard to campaign for better outcomes. So it was a real pleasure to be involved and listening to some of that as well. If there's nothing else, we will close that agenda item. We will move on to minutes of previous meetings. So we are looking to approve as a correct record the minutes of the last Biggleswade Joint Committee held Thursday, the 11th of July. I'll open to the floor for any comments. Members, any commentary? Hayley.
Just on page 12, I don't know who MX Chambers is. What's MX stand for? It should have been Mrs.
I'm sorry.
It's the all-inclusive methodology. I think that's the best way I can put it, unless you want to. Yeah. Yes.
Anything else from everybody else? Could I have a proposer to accept those, please? Councillor Whittaker. And a second. Thank you. I will take that. In fact, let's put it to the vote. Let's be official. All those in favour of approving that, please? We'll carry that accordingly. Thank you. Item number 7, matters arising from the minutes. Please.
I keep banging on about this at town council meetings, and I'm going to keep banging on about this at joint committee. But as it says in the minutes, I questioned whether there'd been any progress about the traffic island on St Andrews Street. And I know that Councillor Whitaker said that it would have to be part of the annual plan, but we haven't had any formal response to Town Council to indicate whether officers at Central Beds are going to put it in the annual plan for next year, or will consider it for the annual plan for next year. And it would be nice to know whether there is any prospect of this going ahead, because I'm fed up with seeing people in the middle of the road because they've crossed halfway and they're standing there with no protection at all, trying to get to the other side. And they're usually older people rather than younger people. So I'm sorry to keep raising it, but I know Peter and officers have been sort of in touch with people at Central Beds. And I think, you know, if we could have some sort of confirmation that it's at least being considered, because you never know whether highways officers may be thinking there's not enough space, it can't work or whatever, but we've had no response at all.
Hayley?
I agree, and I think there's an issue in that the annual plan will be being looked at now. The budget will be set and then they'll look at what they can do within that budget. The budget's likely to be considerably smaller than it has been before, I suspect. I'm just looking at Sarah to a point and saying, at the moment, there is no formal mechanism for the town council to feed into the annual plan for highways. And actually, it strikes me that there needs to be almost a point at which we say, you know, by the end of whatever month, by the end of the year, we, you know, if you've got any ideas for the annual plan, please put them forward so we can consider, so that CBC can consider them. I think it's always been done quite informally, and officers come and things have been discussed, but it's never been a formal thing. But it strikes me, I think it'd be good to have like an annual call to town councils. What would you like to see on the annual plan? Because then stuff like this will absolutely get picked up and you'll get a response, because otherwise, you're right, it relies on a bit of goodwill and, you know, somebody thinking it's as important as we think it is and all that sort of stuff. And I just feel that that might be a better way of doing it. Sarah, what do you think?
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor?
Yeah, I just want to, if as a town council, we can maintain a list, because these things come up, yeah, from time to time. And if we can maintain like a formal list that can then feed into that process, that might help.
Thank you. Hayley?
If you had a formal list, I'm just trying to be a little bit creative in my how to get the message through, and, you know, how important certain projects might be. I think I'm just thinking, if you have an ongoing list, it could be something that quarterly or twice a year you feed that back to CBC regardless of a call. And then, but it's about getting recognition for that, I think, as well. You know, you put it in and then you do want a response, and I think that's where that maybe we've not closed the loop. So, but I think if you're going to have a list, but I think it'd be a great idea to have a rolling list of annual plan projects.
Yeah, no problem. We can easily make sure that that's produced, and we can engage with colleagues at CBC to exchange ideas. I guess the main concern from our perspective is that we have raised it on a number of occasions, but we just haven't had a response.
Please.
Thank you, Chairman. There's reference to the Section 106 agreements and the ongoing situation there in the report, and I believe the clerk has had a schedule with regard to Section 106 agreements, but I believe the schedule could be a little bit more detailed in terms of explaining what funds have been committed and what they've actually been committed for, rather than just saying committed, because it's just basically one word answer saying committed or uncommitted. And I think it would be very helpful from Town Council perspective in feeding back to Central Beds Council if we actually understood exactly what the Section 106 agreements allow, so that we can make constructive comments to Central Beds with regard to funding, because I think one set of funding is due to be, has to be used by next year. And I think it's important that this information is available to the town council so that we can work with Central Beds Council to get what is right for the town.
Thank you.
Having gone to that training on section 106 10 days ago, I think it would be quite useful if a relevant officer from Central Beds could actually come and talk to the town council. I don't mean formally, I mean not in a council meeting, but actually to talk to us about section 106 and the way that Central Beds are handling it. Because some of the things that the barrister said who took the training session didn't quite fit in with what my understanding had been up until now. And I wonder what's going on. And if we're going to successfully input into section 106, we need to know exactly how Central Beds are planning that it should work, and then how to feed stuff in. And I think you're right, Councillor Whitaker, that we should have a separate rolling list for highways works for the annual plan.
Thank you. And I would add to that, I must admit, I haven't checked, but I'm conscious at the last meeting, we were also discussing the fact that Central Bedfordshire's website had section 106 funding lists removed. Sarah, have we any update to that at all?
Yeah, there has been significant progress on that. I was speaking to the 106 team last week. I don't really know how much I can say, but they have made significant progress. So I'm confident that something will be available shortly before your next meeting.
Okay. Because again, that is a key part of an accountability agenda, right? So I'm conscious
they
that
are absolutely aware, as is the director, very much aware of that. Hence, you know, there's been quite a lot of pressure on the team to get it resolved. So,
thank you, Peter.
Okay. Conscious of what Councillor Whitaker was saying earlier, this is a key period for us from a budget perspective as well. And it's an intense piece of work going on at the moment, not least about capital projects as well. It's imperative for us to understand whether or not we can gather 106 funding for these capital projects, because it impacts significantly on the budgetary process. So if we can try and turn that around with colleagues at CBC urgently, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Any other matters arising, please? Madeline?
Could I just say that we are still trying to talk to Central Bedfordshire about the formalised agreement with them about the Market Square, given that Central Beds own the Market Square, but we do a lot of work in maintaining it, mainly because of the charter market, but also because of the War Memorial. And we're still trying to push that forward. So if that can be minuted again from this meeting, it will just remind us to keep it in view. Don't know whether you want to say anything.
Thank you. Do you want to do a quick update, if that's okay, Chair?
Second.
Can you do an update in regard to the progress being made we discussed earlier on the marketplace and on Century House? That situation. Yes.
So thank you. Sorry, on that item there, following the town council resolution several weeks ago, officers contacted CBC, let them know about what the resolution was, namely that two licenses should be entered into, two leases rather should be entered into for Century House and Market Place. That's kind of in discussion at the moment, and actually I'm delighted to say that we're actually, amongst officers at least, have agreed a position whereby the marketplace certainly will be a license, and following this meeting further discussions will be had with colleagues to determine the Century House position. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
I would just add that I think we know where we need to get to, and we're just plotting that path, but we're very much working very closely together on it. So I think it's hopefully positive progress.
Good to hear. Thank you, Steve.
Good, thank you. I know that was blocked for a while, so that's positive to hear. Any other matters arising, please, for the minutes? Nope, we will move on. Thank you, members. To item 8, outstanding actions, where we'll review our action log and ongoing issues list. And I will pass my thanks to Catherine, particularly for putting this together. It's extensive. So I will give you a moment to check and measure that list before we commence debate. Councillors, I do note that from the action logs perspective, all but one are marked complete. So without going through them in detail, I will open the floor in a moment. There is one item that remains progressing, but there is also an exempt item on that towards the end of the meeting. So I would suggest, if you're in agreement, we leave discussion on that action point to the exempt items. Any other commentary on the action log or completed items, please? Nope, thank you. Item 9, school organisational plan for members to receive and consider information from Gareth Chill, Head of Capital Delivery. So Gareth, I will hand over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear, thank you, Gareth.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. I've got presentations, so just bear with me while I try and work Zoom, because it's not familiar to us in the council. And I'll run through that. I hope that's working.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, thank you all for the invite and the time to take in to listen to me go through this. So we've launched a school organisation plan. Hopefully you've had detail in writing in terms of the information we're putting forward, but I'll just do a brief overview and happy to take any questions following on this presentation. So we're currently in the middle of a 7-week consultation, kicked off a few weeks ago at the end of September. We're running through until the 10th of November. So this is an opportunity to gather, information on how we then look to, give members a bit of a steer in terms of planning school places into our longer term plan. So purpose behind what we're doing, the council have got a legal duty to make sure that every single child in Central Bedfordshire has a school place. That's our bottom line. But it's also recognising that Central Beds does different things. We've got areas of vast housing development, and you've mentioned some tonight, which are going to need new schools to come forward. So key consideration is how we're doing that and when. But we're also going through, similar to what's happening nationally, a bit of a reduction in the birth rate coming out of the COVID pandemic and some sort of changes to national policies, which has seen a bit of reduction in areas. And this is a very big authority, lots of different things going on. We're surrounded by 6 or 7 other local authorities as well, which have migration in and out. So it's about assessing all of that going on in the area. A key thing as well, you've been talking about Section 106, is that we're aware that there's a local plan review. And for us in education dealing with schools, this is about preparing our evidence base for that as well. So, ensuring that, if the council have got a strategic plan to deliver new housing going forward, we want to make sure that we're keeping up pace with the school delivery requirements that are there as well. So key purpose of what we're doing at the moment is that there be a plan with a wealth of data in it, but we are just consulting on the kind of how we will implement sort of policies and principles over the next 5 years. So it's a statutory document. It should be annually refreshed. We haven't had one since 2017. I think it expired in 2022. So we're well within the remit of needing to bring this forward. There'll be a number of actions in there. We're introducing some policies, especially around surplus places, which the council haven't had before. But it's becoming a bit of a not an urgent requirement, but you can foresee over the next 5 years demand for school places begin to dry up in some areas. So how are we doing that rather than maybe taking a back seat and letting it get to the point where schools have to close? How are we wrapping services around and what are the alternative options? And it's also a plan that we're required now by DFE to ensure that we're given a clear statement of what our projection is needed, because the education estate is very kind of different to it was 10 years ago. There's a lot more academisation. We've got big multi-academy trusts that have got their own strategic plans and their own direction for places. So it's about us giving clarity of our data and enabling through work with the DFE to engage with multi-academy trusts to help, we'll rely on them in the future, I think, to meet a number of our demands. So as I say, focuses entirely on the principals. So it's what provision will look like. There's a bit there about, we haven't had a plan for a while. We have had principals in school place planning, but they were last adopted by exec in 2013. So a lot of what we're consulting on now, we've kind of done a bit of an update and a refresh to bring it, into what the situation is now 11 years on. There's been a number of changes in legislation. I think 2013 was the beginning of the Academies Act. So we're now 10 years into that, and we're seeing different things in terms of how schools are run. They're independent. And what we've done is we've taken what those original principles were and brought them back down to 7, to really focus on the work we're doing. But we're just keen to get feedback from people on, how they're implemented and what people think. So these are the 7. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but it's been really interesting. We've got in the region of probably over 200 responses to the consultation already in the first few weeks. And it's been interesting going out and having sort of some debate in public about these principles. And although the policies and principles, they kind of do overlap and conflict each other in various places. So it's just fascinating to get the views of people to come back to see how we're then going to maybe prioritise some of these in terms of the plan and the steer we give to members. But Principle 1, for example, you're an area that's going through change, has got new housing coming through. So there is, a requirement to ensure that, we've got local schools for local children at the right time. However, in some areas, we've got demand for school places, but we do have capacity. So there's a conflict between, do we provide, local school places where they are, or is the expectation that, we need schools to be financially and educationally viable, because building new might take some of that demand away. So Principle 1 and 2 overlap slightly, and it's interesting to sort of get feedback. We've been asking people to prioritise these in order just to get that feedback from the public in terms of how we'd apply this. Some of the other comments we've had, just to give oversight, is that probably educational achievement. This really looks at buildings and places and doesn't really link into that kind of what are our aspirations for schools and for children in central beds. So that's something we're hearing coming through the consultation at the moment. And also that probably the top 4 are quite good and solid principles, but the bottom 3 maybe are a little bit woolly. So again, we've been going out listening to what people are saying, and it's been really interesting, the feedback we've been getting so far. We're also interested to see whether there are more. We put 7 on the table, but we're not averse to hearing if people have got consideration of other things that we need to make sure are put into the plan. So this sets out the timeline. As I say, we're in the middle of the consultation. The intention is we will review all the feedback, and we'll be targeting the January Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee to give initial feedback, and then that consultation response to feedback going to exec on the 4th of February 2025. And that will then align with all the data we've got in the back office in terms of saying when schools will be required, where, and how big. There's a lot of engagement going on across the area. This was put together at the start of the consultation, but this list is growing. You can see we were recently out at the Orchard Room in Biggleswade earlier this month, but we're going all around the authority, and there are additional events going to this, and we're talking to other joint committees and other town and parish councils, for example. So there's a lot of engagement going on face to face. But yeah, that's a a very brief overview snapshot. There's an email address for any questions, but yeah, happy to take any here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Members, questions, commentary, please. Hayley, I knew you were going to be writing. Go on.
Sorry, Gareth. So just a couple of things for me. Principle 7 around send. My understanding is that new send schools can only be built if they are an extension of an existing send school, or if they can be a free school. So we couldn't, for example, put a little bit of a send school on the side of an existing mainstream school, maintained school. So when we talk about Principle 7, I'm assuming that's referring to additional resource provisions. So for those of you that aren't doing lots of education stuff, that is essentially normally a room or a provision within a school where a child with SEND might go to for some part of the school day, but they might also be able to attend, the mainstream classes for a certain subject. So they can it's a bit of a halfway house, if you like, but it's not like a full SEND school. So I'm assuming that Principle 7 relates to ARPS.
It relates to a lot, really. I mean, as you're aware, Hayley, we've got a graduated response, haven't we, in terms of our approach to SEND and around provision. So the majority of children with SEND and with what we call an educational health and care plan identifying the needs are actually taught in mainstream schools. So part of the principle was about supporting vulnerable learners in those environments. So through work we've been doing in the 3 to 2 transition, we've been ensuring that it's not just about providing classrooms that are needed for year 5 and 6 in the lower schools, it becomes primary, for example, but additional facilities to enable the school to meet the needs of individual learners in a different way. Absolutely right, it's about ARPS as well, and we've got a big program of providing that step above mainstream classes, which are children that can cope in mainstream but probably need more specialist breakout areas or units or other professionals that are around them to enable them to access the curriculum in an appropriate way. And then at the top of the provision, it is specialist schools. You're right, we're doing a lot around expansion of our existing specialist schools, but we do have a new school on the table, which, yes, every new school now, we're told by the government has to be either an academy or a free school. And that's the route we're going down to get an additional 150 place SEMH schools. So it's interesting because we're focusing really on this plan a lot on mainstream schools. And we're aware that there is another plan that is specifically focusing on that requirement around specialist school places. The two overlap. It would be lovely if they came together at a certain point in time as well, but just a little bit out of kilter. But I think the overall principle that when we're planning schools, we're building new schools, we have to have SEND at the back of our mind at all times.
Sorry, Madeline. There's something in my last one. Obviously, Biggleswade is still going through the transition from 3 to 2. In principle, it's there, but building-wise, we're not quite there in a lot of cases. In terms of school place planning for Biggleswade, what are we anticipating? So I'm trying to work out. My thought was, and my understanding was that, like, the first phase of Landies, the 1,500 homes, was included in the calculations for that 3 to 2. So therefore we've got enough spaces to cover that, for example. I might be wrong, but I'm not sure. So in terms of the timeline for Biggleswade, do we think that the current 3 to 2 transition will see us through the current development that's on the table, and it's just anything else that comes forward we would need to think about additional schools? Is that where we are at Biggleswade?
Yeah, 100%. I think we haven't released the information on the data at the moment, but of course, we're doing it as the day job in the back room. I know what's going on. I think at the moment, based on the housing trajectory we've got within the life of this plan, which is 25 to 30, we're expecting there to be a quantum of development in Biggleswade and a new school coming forward. But at the moment, for the existing community and the way we've reorganised the schools for the 3 to 2 tier, we've got enough places for the kind of foreseeable future until there's a tipping point when those new houses come forward. Does that help?
Thanks.
Sorry.
Madeline?
Following on from that, A member of staff from Ivor Valley was telling me the other day that a new school for Ivor Valley has been put on hold indefinitely. This comes back to what we were talking about earlier in the meeting, because the Section 106 for those 1,500 houses included in the first place a new secondary school. Then Central Beds decided to make Edward Peak a secondary school. So the plan was then that the site that was going to be the secondary school would be a brand new school for Ivor Valley, so that it could expand and meet the need that's obviously there. Now, it seems from what you're saying, we're not going to get a new Ivor Valley school. As I say, that's what a member of staff told me. And you're saying that we've got enough places. Well, we may have enough ordinary school places for the time being, although I'm fully expecting another 4,500 houses to come forward when the call for sites goes ahead shortly. But, you know, what about send places?
Yeah, so my previous answer was about mainstream school places. So that was looking at the primary secondary model, but for send, yes, we need more, and there is a plan that's gone through committees and been approved and includes an expansion of Ivor Valley. There's a review at the moment. It's not been paused indefinitely. So I think I can give that message clear. There is still a plan to, increase send places around Ivor Valley. At the moment, it's been reviewed and will be subject to the kind of MTFP capital review process. So we're expecting that to go to exec in February for outturn, but it's still the intention. We know that in Central Beds, we have an urgent need for send provision. That includes our special schools. So yes, there's still that intention.
The other thing about moving it to the site that was being proposed would be, it would be more easily accessible, because if there's any further expansion on the current Ivor Valley site, it's quite difficult with particularly taxi and that access for taking youngsters to the school. The site that was being proposed originally in the Section 106 for a new school would be much, much more easily accessible off of Baden-Powell Way.
Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, and I think that does bear that discussion. And Gareth, I'm conscious you have just said that, but these send places are not just to meet the need of Biggleswade. This is a central Bedfordshire issue. And I think we're all watching very carefully, particularly with the impact of the talk around the medium-term financial plan, what that's actually going to mean, because I don't know, but I think if we were to ask the head of Ivor Valley and the leaders up there, would an expansion of that site make a difference? I don't think that's the answer. So I'm watching this very carefully, and I'm sure the rest of us are as well. Hayley?
A couple of things. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Gareth, because I know it would be easy to do that. A couple of things. Obviously, Ivor Valley was proposed to move and expand. I think it was an additional 85 places in addition to what they've currently got. And with the view that the new free school, which has been called the Biggleswade SEMH Academy, I believe, for now, was going to go on that site. Now, obviously, it could go at another site, but that was the plan. So it was a bit like a case of moving pieces on a board. So it's not just the impact on Ivor Valley either. And Ivor Valley, I have to say, do the most phenomenal work. The education and the teaching there is phenomenal, but we are asking them to do it in a set of buildings that are becoming increasingly ramshackle, and it becomes we do reach a point where it's not fair on either the teachers or the pupils, I don't think, to ask them to do it in that environment any longer. So all I would say is that I know this has been, so I'm not putting you on the spot, Gareth, because I don't expect an answer. But all I'm going to say is that I know this has been called into the SEND subcommittee, which meets at 9:30 this Thursday for discussion. And I'm hoping that the executive member and other members of the council will be there to give some clearer answers, in particular on Ivor Valley. So that might be a better place, I think, to get some clearer answers on what's happening going forward.
Thank you, Hayley. Any other questions or commentary for Gareth?
Can I come in on that? Because I think part of the concern is kind of hearing things that come back through the rumour mills to say that it's paused indefinitely, it's not going to happen. I think what we're doing is reviewing how it's going to happen. So I think there that sounds like a subtle difference, but it is a big difference, and it's important that we do give the message that we are committed to providing those additional SEND places. The question is how, and I know things look pretty straightforward on the table, and it is a massive exercise, this kind of relocation. And sometimes it's just taking a little bit of a pause and step to make sure that we're thinking about it. Are we doing it in the right way? But we're still committed to, as Hayley said, there's 85 places to take it up to 330. But yeah, there may just be, options that we've discounted along the way that we might want to revisit before we 100% commit to a single option.
Thanks, Gareth. Madeline?
I hear what you say about the rumour mill. It's just that this was a reasonably senior member of staff at the school who obviously doesn't know that it's paused rather than something else. So maybe that's something that you could address through the head teacher. And the other thing I would say is I come back to the section 106 and just wanting reassurance all the time that the stuff that's in there is produced, whether it's the original school or this school, which makes a lot of sense to move Ivor Valley there. We need it done.
Thanks, Madeline. Gareth, did you want to come back on that?
No, that makes sense. I'll follow that up in terms of the member of staff, and yeah, I agree. We've negotiated section 106. I'd like to see everything come to fruition in there that we've asked for. And for me, this document that we're producing is about backing that situation up. So it's, helpful feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Hayley, do you want to come back on that point, or was it a separate? Okay, Hayley, come on.
Just to say, the team now actually in children's actually are, when the section 106 comes forward now, they separate out the SEND contribution from the maintained school contribution, which is really useful, I think, because it does mean that there is dedicated money for SEND, which it didn't used to happen. So I think that will help with the section 106, but also some of the funding, particularly for the 3 to 2, has come from HIF, the HIF funding, I'm sure you remember. So I think while the S106 may not have been spent, I think the HIF money has been spent on the 3 to 2 transition. I'm looking at Gareth because he will know the answer to that one.
It has, yes. Yeah, the HIF has been spent.
Sorry, Madeline, did you want to come back on
Yeah,
that?
I was just I understand what you're saying, but part of the section 106 was the site for the school. That's the important thing as well. It's not just the education contribution. I understand that there are different pots, but it's the site for the school.
Thank you, Madeline. Please.
Thank you. This is a practical point. I've been cycling past Ivor Valley School for the last 2 years. And this September, the queues of minibuses and taxis waiting to get in have really, really escalated. They're about halfway down Stratton Road at the time I cycled past. So are more external to Biggleswade children attending Ivor Valley now? Obviously, big contrast between last September, I never noticed anybody queuing. This September, probably 8 or 9 minibuses queuing at the time I cycled by. Thank you.
It's based on need. So it's all based on need. So as I think Gareth mentioned earlier, it's not based on Biggleswade children go to Ivor Valley. It's based on need. And Ivor Valley, I would say, actually offers an education for some of our more severe SEND children. And so it's all based on their EHCPs, their needs assessment, what they need and who can best meet that. And for some children, that's going to be Ivor Valley, regardless of where they live. So they will come from a long way, and it will change all the time. It will be a constantly fluid thing. So it's quite likely there are more children coming from elsewhere, but again, that will change again in 6 months' time.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you. Slightly different tack, but not totally dissimilar. In mainstream schools, there are any number of pupils who are neurodiverse and who need to be identified whilst they're at school so that they can be managed into further education and the adult world after leaving school. So SEND is incredibly important, but it's also important to deal with those who are academically quite gifted but also have a neurodiversity, which does mean that they find certain things in life difficult. So in the principles, how is that catered for in looking in mainstream, and how is that going to be supported and help to identify these individuals in terms of training of teachers and support workers sooner rather than later, because you can have somebody who's very able and can get very good exam results, but actually still is neurodiverse and needs assistance.
Thank you. Gareth, I think some of that is going to overlap into other areas as well, but I think some of that you might be able to answer as well.
I'm just going to say, great question. The short answer is it's not specifically. I think the great points and probably things for other strategies. I mean, what we're looking at here is, numbers and planning, and have we got schools in the right places? I think that's one to take back to our school improvement and SEND sections. I think it's an education strategy issue, how we, identifying students in our schools and how we give them the best opportunities and advancements, and what are our aspirations for those children. So it's a great point. It's probably not specifically for this plan, but I will take that back and feed that question back.
Thank you. And I will, if I may, follow through on that point, Duncan, because I think the ARPS and the growth of ARPS is a great thing, but I'm also very aware that there are a lot of children utilising ARPS because there is a distinct lack of places in schools that cater for moderate needs as well. And Ivor Valley is supposed to do that, right? But such is the greatness of the need at that site. Children that have moderate needs at the moment are either being asked to attend a mainstream school and utilise ARPS where they're available, or travel, I think, to Leighton Buzzard, which is really not a great deal for our residents, in my opinion, and definitely not our children and school children. So I personally am, again, hopeful that more of this planning is going to take more of that into account. Hayley.
Just to cement some stuff around your question, I think it's about how we marry up what's on the ground, because we have great Senkos, we have great people working in our schools who can help to identify need. Then we have this thing called the graduated response. So it's marrying up the graduated response, how we deliver the graduated response with school places planning, Gareth. I think that's the key thing. And the graduated response is you don't go straight in with an EHCP. If you identify a child that has some needs, you put support. So it might be speech therapy, it might be other things you can offer without an EHCP. So you do that first, and you increase, if you like, the amount of support commensurate with need. And there's a really well set out graduated response, which I'm sure we can give you access to briefings and information if you want. But actually, how we deliver that so that actually children can stay in our mainstream schools, potentially with some ARP support or not, or with Senko support, that it does need to be part of that planning document, and it's how you integrate the two. I think it is a great question, and make sure there is space to do it. I think that's the other key thing, isn't it?
Thanks, Hayley. Members, if I may ask a couple of questions myself on this point before we give you your time back, Gareth, and you have our thanks. Obviously, this is a have your say item. So my first question is who are your target respondents here, and how are you reaching them? I clearly have a view here that we're talking a lot about children with SEND who need additional support, but there's a lot of mainstream children out there as well, clearly. So I'm thinking, how are we making sure we get to the right groups of people, particularly those that don't necessarily traditionally come forward and take part in these processes? And are we also considering youth voice in some of this feedback and these principles? Because there's a lot of children in these education settings right now, and I'm sure they have views on both the process of getting into them, but life within them as well. So my ask is, how are we addressing where this goes out, and how do we get to people?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been putting these plans together for probably about 20 years. This is the most engagement I think I've seen on one. it's an interesting question because although there's a lot of activity, are we getting to the right places? I mean, we're holding in-person engagement events in what we call every cluster, pretty much every town in central Bedfordshire, and even now splitting that across, you know, a cluster like Shefford and Stotfold into Shefford and one in Stotfold as well to make sure we're covering issues. We're putting together an online consultation as well, and of course, you know, we use our schools as a great conduit to get information out through to members of staff, to parents, to get that voice and feedback through. And I think on what we're seeing in terms of the responses back, they're from a very wide range of respondees. So quite confident. I think, yeah, that youth voice is one that we haven't targeted. That's a great point. We have, you know, a youth parliament. Yeah, I'm sat here feeling like that's an omission. But I'll go back and see, yeah, that's definitely something we want to get into the next one and make sure that they're aware of these policies and principles. So yeah, thank you for that feedback.
Thank you. Anything else from anybody else on that one? No, Gareth, I will pass you the thanks from the committee generally. That was really useful. I hope we didn't give you too much of a hard time.
No, good, thank you. Yeah, really good feedback. Thank you.
We will move on to item 10, members. Town Centre Improvement Plan with Beverley not being here. Kareem, I think that throws this squarely into your court.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to? Yeah, do you want to go first? And
So, yeah, yeah, I'm coming for Beverley. I'm a little bit more local, and she's getting over a terrible cold as well. So in terms of UK SPF projects, Karim will give detail about what Town Council's doing, but the team are really happy with the progress that's being made. Funding is starting to hit the Town Council's account to allow things to come forward. So that is all very positive. In terms of kind of some of the other areas of the programme, you mentioned the business event, and Anna and colleagues were there promoting the UK SPF grant funded stuff to businesses. So again, thank you for the invite. It's getting that message out to as many businesses and people as possible. So it's a real kind of scattergun, and we're constantly reviewing the communications and pushing those sorts of things as widely as we can. We have just gone through the community grants process, and we are looking toward to 11 projects across central Bedfordshire, one hopefully in Biggleswade, but we're still in some final discussions around that. That was a pot of 290k, and we had about 1.1 million pounds worth of projects apply for it, and they're all really high quality. So it shows there is a massive demand for this type of funding going forward. In terms of kind of UK SPF and what happens next, obviously we only have funding up until the end of March, which needs to be spent by the end of March. So like colleagues elsewhere, we are looking to the budget in March, not in March, in October, to see what the government say. I know the LGA are lobbying for an extension to UK SPF or further regeneration funding. We haven't heard anything at all though. We have had questionnaires from MHCLG asking about capability to deliver, which I'm taking as a positive sign. And of course, we replied to say that we have a great team in place and a really good working relationships with the town councils, such as Biggleswade, who are more than capable of delivering and have lots of really positive stuff to do. So we will wait and see. I'll just touch on to some of, we touched on earlier, kind of some of the other issues which sort of fall outside of this that we're trying to make progress on. I have a hit list of difficult things which have been hanging around for a long time that I'm determined to get sorted out. So the issues like the licence for the Market Square Century House, I think we're making real progress on there, and hopefully we will start gaining a bit more momentum on those. We're also looking at the electrics in the Market Square, which are long overdue. We've had surveys done. I've just gone back to the company who've done the surveys with a few questions. I think hopefully there's a way forward to get those sorted out once and for all. that will be for a future meeting. So getting rid of some of these big sticky issues. And then let Karim go into the detail of what the town council are doing.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Also, thanks to your colleagues as well for all the support and collaboration they did and engagement they did on the day for the Business Forum event, which has been referred to earlier. In terms of UK SPF funding, there's essentially 3 blocks, if you like, of funding, two which come under the capital allocation and 1 for the revenue allocation, which have been agreed with CBC in terms of milestones and how they're being apportioned and then delivered. The first block surrounds the close to £43,600 worth of capital funding for the Century House toilets refurbishment, the external doors, actually a couple of doors, and security mechanisms, and the external drinking fountain. As Stephen mentioned, we are awaiting funding for that to arrive, hopefully by the end of this week, to hit our bank account. As soon as that does, we will action. We've already been in contact with the preferred supplier to start implementing the works, which they've been told are scheduled for the 6th of January 2025, which suits both the contractor and ourselves, actually, after all our events over the winter season, if you like, autumn, winter. The second tranche of the capital funding for the remaining something like £48,000, making up the something like £91,000 of capital expenditure, allocation, is around a whole host of heritage and functional and directional signage for across the town and all different kind of categories. Also, for the remaining portion of that as well will be allocated to Abbott's Walk and Palace Street in terms of capital expenditure for in keeping with kind of the vision that's being kind of worked up there. And also I've been engaging with the managing company for Abbott's Walk as well, which is going rather well. So that's underway, and I expect a finalised schedule of specification, if you like, and quotes as well, which we've gone out to market for as well. Gone out for quotes to come in by the end of this week. So that's looking favourable. And on the on the revenue side of things, which is just under £30,000, which we've agreed with CBC, there's something like, there's a working group, so a cultural events working group made up of Town Council, the Biggleswade Amateur Theatrical Society, Big Theatre, History Society, and several independents as well on there. That's met already, I think, twice, and there's a third time they're meeting this coming Monday, next week, to finalise the actual and nail down the dates, if you like, for these events. And they've come up with just over, I think, 15 events. So it's between 15 and 18 events, I think it is, which, like I said, they're going to finalise by Monday. And to give us a flavour of the things they've done, they're proposing, which we're putting through with CBC, to CBC as well. There's going to be, what they're proposing is 3 history and ghost walks across the town, 2 indoor pop-up Christmas cinema events, several Sunday afternoon concerts, and a winter music festival as well, and a wellbeing and 5K run, probably scheduled for March time, just before the end of the financial year. Again, they've done an awful lot of work. Actually, I want to thank the working group for this, in terms of pulling together all sorts of their own specifications and scripts and all the rest of it. They've done. It's quite fascinating. I've read quite a lot of historical ghost walks and things like that, which are they look really exciting, I've got to say. So in summary, really, that's going to be coming back to the town council by next Monday, or sorry, I should say Tuesday next week, and then we'll obviously be able to put those dates onto our calendar. But it looks like quite a sort of a rich end to the financial year for this.
Thank you, Karim. Any commentary from the floor? Hayley?
I just wanted to say that that just sounds like a fabulous programme of events. It really, really does. And congratulations to everyone involved, really, in pulling that together, because it sounds really exciting. So well done, everyone.
Yeah, I'll echo that sentiment. Peter?
Just a question really, on the electrical elements. Do we have any sense of when the work will actually be done?
So we've had surveys done, and they had to do CAT scan surveys, because obviously there's a whole minefield of not literally a minefield, but there's a whole host of utilities and things that would need to be looked at. They come forward with a proposal, which I've just come back with some questions on. Obviously, I'll be pushing for it to be done in the new year now, so that we probably avoid Christmas, because I think it may involve a little bit of disruption. But there's a couple of options that I've just finalising the details out, and then I'll share that with you before any decisions made on going out to procure and get that ordered. So you'll be involved at sort of each step on the way, and we'll fit in around what works with the town council.
Okay, well, thank you for the update. I mean, I guess one of the main concerns from a town council perspective is, and we've been talking about some fantastic events, Christmas is almost upon us. And that for us is one of the key events of the year. And bearing in mind the length of time we've been engaging connected to this, it would have been nice, I think, to have had some resolution in place before the big Christmas events, to make sure, obviously, that the people who display on that event are well supported and safe. Thank you.
Anything from anyone else on this item? No, thank you all. Good update. We will move on to item number 11. I'm conscious we are around 45 minutes from the end of the meeting with a number of items left. So if I could ask members to keep their presentations as tightly confined as they can. I don't want to rush through anything, but I also don't want to leave anything out because we've run out of time. So item number 11, road safety. Carol, please.
Thank you, Gareth. So I just found the right page. I'm still seeing vehicles go the wrong way down the bulk. I saw one this morning, go the wrong way down the bulk. Obviously, bicycles are allowed to cycle both ways, but cars are. I do. Thank you. Yeah, and certainly the issues of parking on the high street. There is a sort of culture of delivery drivers being able to park wherever they like and not take responsibility for any issues they cause. And blocking the pavements is a concern that, you know, people are moving out into the road because they cannot get past the pavement safely. So that is a big concern. I've also seen a lot of people on the phone with headphones on, and they'll step into the road without looking with their headphones on. You know, someone is going to be killed in that situation at some point, I would imagine. And then the BP Pulse poor performance, we've still got one of the 8 chargers on the bulk is working currently. And there's a big queue of people that want to use it. So, yeah. And the app that BP Pulse provide doesn't tell you whether it's working or not. So you have to physically visit the site to see if it's working. So that has been a big concern for me. I've raised some complaints with BP Pulse and had pathetic responses back from them. So I'm going to cancel my membership, to be honest. It's so annoying that it's not providing the service at a time when the growth in EVs is really taking pace. And my number 4 was about could we extend some of the 20-mile-an-hour zones, and particularly the area around the bulk, because we've got the GP surgery, we've got the children's centre, the libraries, we've got the special school and the regular school just there. It's a very busy area and people are doing 30 miles an hour. And I'm seeing them go fast along the bulk and along Chestnut Avenue. You know, I think we need some action taken. I would like to understand what the barrier to putting extending the 20-mile-an-hour zone would be there. And Drove Road, this is something that's said on Facebook. People are saying they can't easily get in and out of their properties because of the orientation of their drives and the volume of traffic that they're facing. So that was the local one. And yeah, more provision for the school children crossing roads. You know, I give an example there at Hitchmead Street and Drove Road. That there isn't a formal crossing there. There are bollards out, but it doesn't seem to be very safe. And and there's the safety on the contraflow roads when you're cycling into the oncoming traffic. We had another incident with my partner this week. A car was coming along the correct way along the bulk, but he was looking over his shoulder to see whether there was vehicles coming from the town centre, and he didn't see my partner. Managed to get out of his way, but if there's going to be a fatality there. So whilst I welcome the provision of that facility to get into town by bike that way, I don't feel it's safe as a regular user of it. Is there scope to do something different? And then, yeah, the new flats next to the Italian restaurant, the road clearly says they are supposed to turn right to go into Foundry Lane to leave their estate, but we've regularly seen them turn left the wrong way down the one-way street into the road that goes past Aldi and then out along Station Road. So they're not following the instructions. So is signage possible to make it clearer that they've got to turn left? And yeah, the pavement parking on it's not the White Horses, it's a White Hart pub. I was in the Cafe Mocha and I saw a family park their vehicle right next to the roundabout on the pavement area, disperse out to City Point to collect a parcel, and then they left the roundabout. They left the pavement and went straight into the middle of the roundabout without really looking. So I was very concerned. And I raised it with the police and I raised it with CBC, but they said unless a traffic officer was in attendance, they couldn't do anything about it. So are we going to get any more traffic enforcement officers visiting Biggleswade more regularly, I suppose is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Members, comments, please.
Yeah, so on the contraflow cycle path on the book, there are a number of signs that indicate that cycles are becoming the other way. Some of those are turned around, so they're not visible to motorists. I suspect if they were turned the right way around, they'd soon turn the other way around. So maybe something better, a better kind of fixing can be looked at there. And I think we need more of those signs. There's not that many. And the white paint indicating the contraflow with the little cycles in the road, that quickly fades. So that might need some addressing. And I just want to add to the parking issue that you just added. There seems to be a recent spate of motorcycles parking on the path in front of the White Hart car park. And they seem to pick the narrowest section of the path, right? Some of it is quite wide, but the narrow section seems to be the favourite for parking motorcycles on there. But we do have motorcycle parking provision in the White Hart car park, but maybe not enough. So that's just a point. And yeah, I live on that section of Drove Road that you mentioned, and it is a little difficult to get out. But especially at school times. And if it's raining at that time as well, the queue is massive. So yeah, it is a little difficult at times.
Thank you. Hayley?
A few things. I recognise everything you've written here. I think we probably all do. I was just looking up about where is 20-mile-an-hour zone applicable, and actually WASPA say where speed limits are already low is where you put a 20-mile-an-hour limit, because there's no point in putting it in where people are speeding, are doing 30 plus, then you'll never get them to do 20. That's where you need more aggressive, if you like, action. So I think that there's bigger issues at play here, and I'm conscious of things. I mean, the parking on the high street near the railway bridge is just infuriating, and I know I see it constantly. But I also know we went through a stage of removing lots of bollards and lots of things which would be the thing that would prevent that. And so I don't necessarily think we want to put them back in again. I agree with you, enforcement is the way forward, but I wonder if one of the things we could do is just send this list to Gary Powell and actually ask for him to respond formally to this. So he is the head of highways, and ask him to, and maybe him and Councillor Baker, and ask them to respond formally to this list. And also for the request for more enforcement, because I think we need a formal response.
Thank you, Hayley. We'll come back to that in a second, because I would actually quite like us to take a formal decision on that. I think it's a good idea, but I think we should agree to that, please.
Yeah, with respect to the parking of delivery drivers, etc., I was speaking to the enforcement officer one day, and somebody parked on the roundabout in question, and they delivered a parcel, and I said, what's the situation? He said, well, if they're doing work, they're not going to be there long, we can't really book them. So it's not going to help. You need something different to stop the delivery drivers parking wherever they like. I've seen them on the bridge. I've seen 3 or 4 of them on the bridge. I've seen them cause a traffic jam. I've directed traffic to try and get around them. I've asked them to leave because they're causing parking both sides, and there's only one section in the middle. I've seen cars go around into the wrong lane to try and get through to the traffic lights. It's just mayhem. And there is a speeding problem in Biggleswade, especially with Down Drove Road, because I've had to dive out the road of several cars on that road, just crossing to see people on the other side. And I've stopped somebody from getting run over when there's a van parked and a car comes down the road, and I actually grabbed hold of them and stopped them. So it happens all the time. I'm not there very often, but it's happened a few times. And also on the top of the road that the chair mentions, I often cross to go to the allotments, and I think it was Sunday, I nearly got run over by a car coming around the roundabout, never slowed down, and luckily my wife saw it and shouted to me because I was halfway across. Now there's a pavement there that says you can cross halfway. It only takes 2-3 seconds, but I was lucky. And I think there is a big problem, and somebody, as you said, somebody somewhere is going to get hit fairly soon. There's too many, as they say in health and safety risk records, a near miss is usually an advance warning of something's going to happen. We've had a lot of near misses.
Thank you. I have a lot to say on that subject, so I'm going to sit on my hands for a moment, please, Madeline.
I was just going to refer to the fact that there's something on the forward plan that we discussed last time about parking and the enforcement strategy, which is supposed to be on one of our meetings. So if we could get a response to Carol's document in time to discuss it at the next meeting, then we can discuss the whole strategy and maybe have the relevant officer talk to us on that.
Thank you. I think Carol's document raises a lot of very good points, but it's not just, say, the bulk where you've got two-way traffic in terms of cars going one way and bikes going both ways in the cycle lane. Exactly the same applies in Back Street. And with zebra crossings, the one in Shortmead Street was always a very good one to get run over on if you weren't fully alert. And the one outside near Stratton House, that is at the edge of the 20-mile, 30-mile limit. And I can guarantee that virtually every time I go to cross there, at least one motorist will go straight past, totally oblivious to there's somebody waiting to cross. So all these points are very relevant. I think that your suggestion that we need to formalise this and get some answers back for the next meeting is the way forward.
Thank you, Duncan. Anybody else? I will add to that list. I have been contacted by any number of residents in the Sorrel Way area recently, complaining about nuisance and antisocial parking there, largely, I think, attributed to the new store and the bistro in that area, which I believe is doing very well, but it is causing issues with parking in between the traffic calming in that area. I'm aware that they have been granted planning permission for additional parking spaces in that car park, but I haven't seen any activity on making them happen. So again, I am talking to officers about what we can do there. And again, Normandy Lane has been raised with me as an area of problem. The footpath next to McDonald's is almost entirely blocked by hedgerow. And if you can see past that, there is normally a string of HGVs and parked cars eating McDonald's on the road as well. You have 3 or 4 exits from other industrial units and similar along the way. I can also see that as another area where there probably isn't data to show accidents and insurance claims, but there is clear information for me, listening to local people, listening to residents, wandering these areas yourself, that near misses should be in that data and part of that planning. And I harbour a concern that often it's not, and I think we need to do more with that, because I can foresee a bigger problem happening somewhere in Biggleswade at some point soon. So I would like to support the idea. I think, Duncan, you have given support to that, but Hayley, would you be prepared to put that forward as a formal motion, please?
I would. Can I change it slightly as well? Because we've added some other bits and pieces in. So I'm just wondering how best we do that, Chair. Because I'm also thinking, I think you mentioned Saxon Drive. You'd already mentioned Saxon Drive. My view is that Saxon Drive should be a 30. It's currently a 40. Particularly because you've got people crossing now from the estate on the other side. When that road was built, everything was all on one side, but now that's not the case anymore. So I think the speed limit needs to reflect that, and I've said that for quite some time. So I'm just wondering how we capture, I'm slightly looking at you, Peter, as well. How do we capture all these other little bits and pieces so that we get a document that we can send off? Because I'm happy to propose something, but how do we capture it?
I mean, Catherine is taking the minutes of the meeting. We can capture what we think is the majority of the conversation and replay it back to the chair to make sure that you're comfortable with that and push it through that way if you want it. Because we capture all the kind of transactional stuff that we've talked about this evening, unless you want to make a fresh proposal.
Thank you, Peter. So
I'd like to propose that we send a slightly formalised with the addition of any other issues that we've raised tonight around highways that are approved by the chair and vice chair to go to Gary Powell, and who is head of highways, and also to go to Councillor Baker, who is executive member for highways, and ask for a formal response to the points that have been raised here.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Madeline. I'll carry that unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Carol. Item 12, Highways Task Force report, to receive a report presented to the CBC executive. Sarah, are you taking that item or?
It was requested at the last meeting, and I did speak to Gary, and he was agreeable for it to be on the agenda for this meeting, but there isn't anybody to speak to it. It's been through quite extensive discussions at CBC overview and scrutinies as well as executive, so it is there for information.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll pause briefly then for members just to take a moment and look at that, and then we can open to dialogue and discussion as needed. Councillor Strong.
If I may make an observation, not strictly covered in this, but we often get reports to town council about roadworks that are taking place and road closures. And some of the routes that are set out in those reports don't seem to be entirely practical. I haven't considered going back 2 different ways and things like that. And that, I think, needs to be possibly incorporated in a document such as this, is to make sure that the alternative routes are clearly set out and considered to be practical.
Thank you. And I think we've got first-hand evidence of that with some issues on London Road, haven't we, in the last couple of months. So I think it's a relevant point to raise. Thank you. Madeline.
Paragraph 27, officers advise that methods of communication were dependent on the audience, and then a list of who are the audience. It does not include town and parish councils. And, you know, it would be very good to have had that added to the report. You do feel sometimes that town and parish councils are overlooked.
Again, I can only support that comment, Madeline. Can't not support that, please.
Yeah, on the Appendix A to the report, the second page of that, which is page 38 of the back. So section 14 there talks about defects when roads are opened and what should happen. So it seems to me that when works are left in a poor state, and there's a prime example of Biggleswade in Hitchin Street, which wasn't emergency work of any sort. It was scheduled. So that's been left in the right state. The contractors must be responsible for that, but I don't know if there's any mechanism for them to be chased and for them to put the, you know, make it right. But this section 14 seems to suggest that should happen. It obviously isn't happening, but instead we've got a big trench in Hitchin Street, which is filled with tarmac now. So it seems that CBC are taking the cost of dealing with that, and long term that's not going to be effective in any case. So I just wonder what is happening about chasing contractors who leave streets in a bad state after their work.
Thank you, Hayley.
I can respond. I used to be executive member of highways too. So officially speaking, street works monitor any works done by contractors. So they will go out after a work has been finished and see it's been finished to an acceptable standard, and if it's not there, we'll bring them back. As with many departments, street works is a little bit understaffed, and therefore there aren't enough people to check everything all of the time. However, the council have, I believe it's 12 months to check the state of any works and get the contractor back. My mind says check it after 11 months, because if it's going to sink and dip, it might not do it straight away. And actually, you know, what you're talking about is where it almost subsides and you know, goes down within the channel. So I would be saying check it at 11 months and get them back if you see any problems then, because quite often straight after the works it looks quite nice, but within a few weeks or months that's when the problems start to arise. So we have 12 months is my understanding to get them back to do the work. So it can go either through Fix My Street, or it can go, and yeah, I would say this work has been done fairly recently when in the Fix My Street report, or I believe there is, I'm sure you guys have access to the street works at centralbedfordshire.gov.uk email address, so you can just send it straight to Streetworks, because they are the team that will come out and monitor it.
Please.
Obviously, CBC is aware of that because it's been patched kind of patched. So there must be a process within CBC to realise that there's an issue with it. Is it joined up in any way? That it seems that it's not.
I don't necessarily think that it is as joined up as you would hope it is. So I think they'll go out and say, oh yeah, there's a big dip in there, that's dangerous, it needs filling, without necessarily going back and checking who created that dip in the first place. So I think you're right. It's that closing the loop thing again there. So maybe that's something we can add to our ever-growing list.
Correct.
Thanks. Just to add some context as well. I think the officers following the last town council resolution on this Hitchin Street point went back to Street Works, and I think there's a couple of emails actually back and forth, and I mean, the emails were responded to quite promptly, but I think they did reveal that they asked us essentially which contractors had done the work. I wasn't entirely sure at the time, given that it was several weeks, I think, if not months after the event. However, they assured us that they will be revisiting Hitchin Street very soon indeed to look into this more profoundly, I suppose.
I can tell you it was Anglia Water, because I was there. And it was all due to the leaks, and it was due to the new flats being built, and it's the same as down the side of the road. The whole thing is a mess. And they just get away with it. I don't know. I can see why they're getting away with it. It's not joined up. So.
I think given budgetary pressures, I think the observation by this committee that the council bearing cost for future reparations on that basis is poor. Any other commentary, please?
Yeah, there's also damage on the bridge. Parking, constant parking there. I think it's been repaired 4 times. That seen people who are damaging it and not paying for it. It's the same people. So there's an easy win there. You want to try and improve the budgetary system, get the people who are doing the damage to pay for the damage.
On a different point, on Fix My Street. So I did try and report something on Fix My Street once, and the app told me that it's not CBC's responsibility. It's because it was an estate, so it was the developer who was at fault. The fault seemed to be a leaking water main, so I'm not sure the developer would be responsible for that. But I just wondered if Fix My Street could be looked at so that you can still report it. It may not be CBC's responsibility, but the issue is diverted to whose responsibility it actually is. Because a member of the public being advised to contact the developer is a bit poor, I think. That could be a little more joined up also, I think.
You want to come back?
Let you come back on that as well, because I know that you get to deal with lots of that developer stuff. But I would say that I think that was raised as part of the task and finish group, that lack of joined up thinking, if you like, and sort of saying it's not us, but not saying who. So I think there's probably not enough officer time for them to refer everything on to the next person, whether it's to Anglian Water, whether it's to the developer or who it is. But I think it's more than appropriate for officers to say, this is the responsibility of Taylor Wimpey, this is the responsibility of Anglian Water, and point you to the right people to contact. And I don't even think that was happening until fairly recently. So I think it's finding that balance between taking lots of officer time and actually making sure something gets prepared. But I'll let you come in on developers.
Don't know if that's a good idea, Hayley. Yeah, I'm clearly a huge chunk of my ward is under developer management, and quite frankly, it is a nightmare consistently trying to chase for improvements. And in that situation, whereby the water main, for instance, or the waterworks under the ground, they're often still the responsibility of the developer because the water company won't have taken them on. The civil engineering firm will be responsible for it, and pardon my cynicism, but they don't really like to invest in that sort of thing, do they? It is a nightmare getting this stuff done, and I know this came up at Task and Finish because I was at the meeting when that came up. CBC have to focus, and its officers have to focus on the roads and the things that they can do something about. but not giving people a name or a place or a thing to go and talk to is also not helpful. And actually what then tends to happen is it will come into a town councillor's inbox, a ward councillor's inbox, and or similar, because people simply don't know where to go with it. But it is difficult because we have a lot of that, particularly in the east of Biggleswade as well. Councillor.
Just a further point on that is, how do CBC monitor adoption agreements and such like? Because that is one of the big problems on new estates, is that it's getting these roads and sewers, etc., adopted, because the estate I live on, the roads and sewers weren't adopted for something like 20 years. And in that meantime, everything falls into a big hole until you get the adoption process. So how's that being tackled by CBC with planning permissions, etc., and what are they doing to try and enforce the developers to do it? Because obviously you're not going to adopt anything until the roads and etc. are in a reasonable state.
I'll come back on that if that's all right with members. So you asked a great question. This was raised at full council not so long ago. The reality, of course, is that a lot of this is set by central government policy. Central beds only have a certain amount of sway or capacity in that respect to adopt roads and highways and similar. I know there is always appetite to bring those things in, but they are driven entirely by the developer. There are some corner cases there around things like long stop dates and long stop agreements. But generally speaking, the developer has to want to come forward and offer that up for adoption for that element of section 38, I think it is, planning to move forward. And it does leave residents quite badly exposed, in my opinion, and it is a matter that the central government needs to consider and resolve to amend, because right now I believe there is too much power in an area that councils and town councils and parishes have no way to influence, with hands quite literally tied behind back. So I have answered questions on this. I have put forward a full question. I've supported a motion on this for the council leader to write to government, and I will continue to do so because something has to change, in my opinion. I'll allow you to come back.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you could raise it with the local government association, with them, with the view to them lobbying the government, because it's clearly something that affects all local authorities, but it affects the people who live in these areas, and it's not right that the developers can just delay things indefinitely. There should be an absolute, the government needs to look at its planning policies in that respect to ensure that the developers can be forced to deal with these things within an appropriate time, and the councils can take control of adoption if necessary.
Thank you, and I will. If you could add that to the action log, Catherine, I will take that forward as well, because I haven't spoken to the LGA, but again, why not? Why shouldn't we? And it's in everybody's interests, quite frankly. Sorry, Kat, do you have your hand up there? Sorry, Gary.
Sorry, my comments brings us back to the report a little bit. As a report, I think the wording needs to change slightly as well, and the use of words. And I think that would help some of the comments that have been made about how things might happen in a better way. So I'll give an example. If you look at item 22, which is on page 31, if you read that little section, members are informed that the primary role of Street West End is to uphold the council's statutory network management duty to coordinate and proactively manage all activities to place the road networks, ensure that any necessary disruption was minimised. From what to what? It has to be minimal. So my point is that the use of the English language in this document doesn't really help fix the things that we've been talking about. So I appreciate it's been through a number of other people and looked at this, and they may have looked at it in the context, but I think it needs to be looked at from an English language point of view. I think that would help significantly if that was done as well.
Thank you. Please.
I do have one more. So I'm not sure if this should be covered by this or not, but I'm going to raise it anyway. So it's footpaths, and a particular footpath, the footpath by the railway, and the vegetation overgrowth there. So is anything happening about that? I guess it's a complicated issue because you've got Network Rail and CBC and maybe the houses along there, sort of all involved. So I just wondered if anything is happening about tidying that up, making it actually walkable.
Conscious is not directly linked to this point. However, I think given that we've resolved to take some of these items back to highways, and that's likely to sit under that management. And I know, Hayley, you've done some stuff. I don't know if you want to come back, but if not, I will ask that we add that to that letter that we resolved to send to Gary.
I think this comes under right of way. It's a footpath. It's a classic footpath. So it has to be a metre wide. So I have to say our rights of way officer doesn't live too far from Biggleswade. He's very good, and he does come out and have a look, and will take his shears out and do what he can. As with most areas in central Bedfordshire, the number of cuts per year has been reduced this year because of budgetary constraints, and that has impacted on the ability, on how much overgrowth has been cut back. There is also, I'm sure some of you are aware, there is also a cut through from that footpath through to Dells Lane that is also very, very overgrown, that actually no one seems to own it. And no one seems to want to take responsibility for cutting it back. And myself and the resident, and I'm sure yourselves, have done lots and lots of digging. No one owns that bit of land, and of course no one's going to want to take responsibility for doing the works. So that might have to be a bit of maybe we can try and use the community payback scheme. I'm just thinking, Sarah, for getting that done, because that might need a bit of community action to keep that. And it's, again, I think it's a symptom of the fact that CBC probably used to do it because it was adjacent to a right of way. No one was quite sure who owned it, but with tighter and tighter budgets, they're looking closer and closer and scrutinising everything they do and saying, actually, should we be doing this? And I think that it may have fallen foul of that because I've never known that particular path not to be cut.
Thanks, Hayley. Councillor, if you could keep this one brief, please.
Very briefly, on that footpath by the railway, the lighting down there is absolutely appalling, and that needs to be done because it is impossible to virtually see when you're going down there unless somebody's riding a bike towards you, and then you can see the bike, but they can't see you.
Agreed. Thank you. In the interest of time, unless there's any further important items, I will move us forward. Thank you. The BJC work plan, CBC exec and OSC forward plans to be considered, and any relevant items raised for the joint committee work plan. Open commentary. I think the work plan's been provided, Sarah.
No, it's just trying to bring this forward as a standing item really for the committee to have a forward look at what decisions executive plan to take over the next year, and what will be scrutinised by our scrutiny committees, and identify if there's anything of interest and relevant to the terms of reference of this committee that you might want to discuss that can feed into that decision making process.
Just an observation on page 63, there's reference to 16th January 2024 and 17th of April 2024. Should that be 25?
Sorry, on page
63.
Sorry, I was looking at work plan. I know we're trying hard to do miracles, but planning in reverse is probably not within the remit. So yeah, I would like to think it should be 25 and not 24. Hayley.
I think it's, clearly there's a lot of there is a lot of stuff coming through on budgets, and my understanding is that a lot of stuff's come out of the forward plan for the executive, because until the budget is set, they don't quite know what they're going to approve or not approve next year. So I think we'll see it repopulated again early next year. A couple of things that will be worth looking at are freight strategy. So this is on page 56, to look at the freight strategy. So this in particular, Drove Road is part of the freight network, which is why we can't put you can't put traffic restrictions on there. You couldn't put chicanes or other things on there because it's part of the freight network. So I think that freight strategy and how it impacts on Biggleswade actually could be really important for this council to look at. And again, flooding. I know that we narrowly missed out, narrowly missed being flooded, but I also know that in Ivor Gardens there were some people who it came remarkably close to their back doors, looking at the levels, it was close. It was a close call this time. So I'd be interesting again to see how ready we are for flood and whether there's anything more we need to be doing around flood and what more support we can be expecting from Central Bedfordshire around that.
I had picked those two items out actually, so I agree. I think because of the flooding thing, I mean, my garden was underwater for 13 consecutive days, which it's never been before, but it was nowhere near the house, thank goodness. However, I think there's something about what's happening, and I suspect it's as much to do with surface water runoff further upstream in the Ivor Valley. I'm not sure quite how the Environment Agency manage the river now, but we've lived there 35 years and it's been very different in the last 12 months. So I think there's a big issue there because it comes back to what's going to happen with the local plan, how much more housing is going to be built. We've got a large housing estate on the outskirts of Shefford between the main road and the river. We've had all that building at Arlesey. There are things happening and the water is rising very quickly after rain. It always has been managed at Jordan's Mill. I don't know whether it's managed in the same way or what's going on, but they used to keep the water high on the Langford side of Jordan's Mill to ensure there was enough water in the Shefford Cut. And you could sometimes see after heavy rain that our bit of the river did rise quite quickly. But I mean, it's rising even quicker now, and I don't know what's happening with the Shefford Cut or anything else. So I think we could do with a discussion with relevant flooding people or the relevant environment people, whoever they are in Central Beds. And then maybe we should be questioning the Environment Agency on what their role is in this. And the other thing that I'd like to know from the Environment Agency, because at one stage a few years ago, there was an edict came out from the European Union, and I know we're no longer members, but the edict was to remove as many as possible man-made structures on our rivers to make it easier for fish and eels and stuff. But those man-made structures, some of them have been in place 200 years, and nobody knows what the effect might be if you suddenly remove some of this stuff. So there's a big issue there. For me, it's not only the immediate risk of flooding, and I mean, some houses in Sandy weren't as lucky as the houses in Biggleswade, but it's what we're doing on the wider planning side of things for this, and how much input do the relevant officers in Central Beds have into the formation of the local plan, and how much input does the Environment Agency have? I think those are the wider issues that I'd like to have a discussion about.
Thank you. And I agree. Duncan.
Very much on that point. When we had that really bad rain on that Monday, the Flick clearly overflowed. Ampthill to Flitwick, the Flitwick to Clophill Road, that was closed. You've looked at what was happening in Shefford and the flooding there. It is clearly an issue in the valleys and the tributaries of the Ivor that is coming in, and then comes impacts on us. But it's not just a Biggleswade issue, it's a whole Ivor Valley and the tributaries that need to be looked at in this summit. And I hope the summit on the 7th of November will actually be taking into account what has occurred since the original reports were prepared.
Thank you, Tony.
I was just thinking Alice Bishop. So Alice, A-L-Y-S, Alice. Bishop is our flood person, and I think she'd be great if we could get her to just come and talk to us, even for a short while. Because yeah, I think it really, everybody's raised some great points, and I just think she'd be somebody who could, an officer who could, she's a bit of an expert on flooding. But I think we had a near miss, because I mean, my understanding is the level of rainfall that happened over that weekend in that period was something like 3 months worth of rain in 6 days or something. It was ridiculous amounts of rainfall on the A421 at Marston Mortain, which showed that it was ridiculous amounts of rain. So there's nowhere for the water to go. The ground is sodden, so of course it rises. You know, the river levels rise very quickly, but our floodplains did their job, right? You know, and we should be lucky that we have them around Biggleswade because they did do their job. But I think Alice would be a great person.
Would we like to resolve to make that ask formally? Sarah?
Yes, also I keep forgetting to turn my mic off. I do know Alice is extremely busy at the moment, given the unprecedented situation. What I was thinking of back in March, when Leighton was quite badly impacted by the heavy rain, and Partnership Committee had a similar discussion, and we did manage to organise for the Environment Agency, the IDB, and Alice and Mark as the emergency planning to do a presentation. So some of the information in that presentation is sort of universal because it goes into the roles and responsibilities of each of those organisations, which is really important. So I can have a look at that and perhaps share that with this committee because there is, you know, it's relevant information. But I do know, obviously, from the emergency that we've just had, those officers are really, really busy dealing with hundreds and hundreds of emails and queries coming in. So I would just ask for some, yeah, and I think, you know, obviously the whole emergency scenario has been led by senior officers, and I think perhaps just some caution and wait for that to happen and all of that. Reporting briefings to follow.
Thanks, Sarah. Do you mind knocking your microphone off, please?
I take on board what Sarah's saying, but you know, if we scheduled something for our April meeting, for instance, you know, then we'd have more idea of what's happened in the rest of the winter. But I think it's, as I'm trying to say, it's a strategic issue as much as a what do we do when the water's rising? That's an emergency response. That's one thing, but it's the strategic issue about what are we doing about, because I've seen heavy rain before and I've seen the effect on the river. So I'm not convinced that this was such a serious dump of rain that, you know, we couldn't have expected it. I think there are other issues at play, and I think we need to explore that. And so, you know, if we could make it maybe in April when things hopefully will have calmed down a bit, I think we, you know, that would be good.
In time for the April showers, you mean, Madeline? I think maybe that's a reasonable middle ground. If perhaps we could get the report circulated and consider that at the next meeting of the BJC, and in the meantime, make a request for Alice to meet with us at the April meeting and see what response we get. I am conscious of the pressures on them all at the moment. However, Madeline, I don't think you're wrong. One of my last actions on DMC was to support residents in Langford and not look to move ahead with the development that was being built on grounds of groundwater and surface water concerns being managed through a pumping station that will be privately managed and privately owned. And I just didn't think that that was ever going to end up in a great place. And we have wider question marks on the A421 around what happens with privately managed pumping stations and some 60 million litres of floodwater apparently. So again, I do think strategically SUDS is becoming more of a problem. And I think it's something we should consider and move forward with. So Sarah, if you're comfortable with that and members are comfortable with that, we'll take that forward. Thank you. Anything else we wanted to put forward as part of the forward planning? Madeline?
Well, I note items 18 and 19 on page 49, which are the final capital and revenue budgets. I wonder if it would be possible to have the idiot's guide to CBC's budgets and what you're doing after the budgets have been set. You know, what are the key points from the budgets that might affect Biggleswade is really what I'm thinking about.
Go on.
I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to know enough and understand enough to be able to give you an idiot's guide.
I'm not asking you, I'm asking an officer.
I was going to say, but it's sometimes to get that Biggleswade slant, you do need the member input as well. And I'm not sure that I'll know enough, but I'm happy to work with officers. Sarah, if we're able to, I'm happy to work with officers to come up with something. I'm sure Gareth would as well.
Thanks, Haley. And again, I do think it's a good ask. It is quite the perplexing set of documentation, and it has county-wide implications. So
yeah, I mean, I'm well aware that finance is difficult, and it's not just CBC. There's an awful lot, and goodness knows what's going to happen with the national budget and how that will affect the funding for principal authorities. But you know, we need to know what we're going to have to deal with.
I do agree on that. Haley, all yours. Members, very conscious we are now at 9 o'clock and we do have a couple of items still to cover off. So I will move us forward just to agree future meeting dates. And there has been a question mark here raised around Tuesdays and Thursday meetings going forward. I'll open that to the floor.
I think we should be on a Thursday. I don't know why this meeting was on a Tuesday. It just sort of slipped through, but we have, as BJC, always met on a Thursday, even when we were meeting during the daytime. But as far as future meeting dates are concerned, the one proposed for April is actually Maundy Thursday. So it's within school holidays, and it's probably the beginning of lots of people wanting to go away for Easter and all the rest of it. So I'd like to propose that the date for April is brought forward a couple of weeks to the 3rd of April to avoid school holidays and all of that. So the January date is a Thursday, and I'd like to propose the 3rd of April as the April date, which is also a Thursday. And Sarah has checked, there's no conflict with CBC council meetings.
Done. Any other commentary before we move through that? No, resolved. Okay, thank you. We'll take that as read. And that takes us to exempt items, which we will begin as soon as we're offline.